One morning, without warning, she left, leaving the twins in Chike's trembling arms. Chike became father and mother. He strapped the babies to his chest with worn cloth, pushing a rusty wheelbarrow from street to street, taking any job he could, carting sand, hauling goods, sweating under the hot sun. His love for the boys was his only wealth. One afternoon, as he pushed his barrow along a busy roadside, a sleek black SUV slowed beside him. The tinted window slid down to reveal a woman in her early 30s. Sit tight and enjoy this inspiring story. Don't forget to subscribe. The morning the twins arrived, the city yawned like a tired god, tossing heat and dust across corrugated roofs while a restless sky considered rain and declined. Chike stood at the doorway, spine bowed, heart tethered to two small weights breathing on his chest. In the alleys beyond, a future paced, unseen, rehearsing its entrances. Somewhere, distant tires would one day whisper against tar, dark windows observing, a hinge of fortune waiting to swing. For now, the house smelled of boiled herbs and iron, and the walls listened. The clock ticked like a nail being tapped into wood. Nights had a way of arguing with themselves. Silence dared the twins to cry. Hunger dared Chike to choose which bill would remain unpaid. He learned the choreography of small survival, the rhythm of rocking and shushing while thoughts clattered like cutlery in an empty cupboard. The ceiling carried maps of old leaks, the floor carried footprints of previous tenants, and the room carried the weight of decisions that could not be postponed. He measured time by how many lullabies fit between thunder and sunrise, and by how many shadows he could outwork before morning found him. When morning found him, Ada was gone. The basin was stile wet, the thin towel deflated on the line, and the bed pressed a shallow shape that lifted like a sigh. He did not chase, he inventoried. 2 infants, sour milk on a cloth, 3 coins, 1 wheelbarrow, a spine that refused to fold again. Grief did not shout, it arranged objects. He strapped the twins to his chest, their warmth a stubborn answer to the vacancy in the doorway, and stepped into a street that had never promised kindness. Somewhere, a door closed. Somewhere else, one waited to open. The wheelbarrow protested at first, a squeal that mocked his resolve. He learned to lean his weight into the handles, to turn hunger into leverage, to smooth the barrow's tantrums with oil begged from a motorbike mechanic who spoke with his eyes. Sand obeyed gravity, debts did not. He hauled both. The sun wrote its laws across his neck, and his shirt recorded salt like a ledger. He courted exhaustion because it kept doubt at a distance. Each tilt and heave was a line of prayer. Each pay was a rumor of enough, and each evening asked him for proof. Markets taught him the grammar of motion. If paused, men with louder wrists took the job. If he hurried, he spilled either sand or sanity. So he threaded the chaos, yielding without surrender, speaking with elbows and patience. He counted coins the way farmers count clouds, translating shapes into chances. Body became instrument, hope became habit, fear became fuel that burned clean if he kept moving. He named the streets by what they took and what they returned. He memorized which gutters flooded first, which corners meant trouble, which faces looked away, and which faces looked too long. The twins slept like answered questions on days that paid. On lean days they fussed, more weather than children, forecasting storms in their fists. He learned the alchemy of stretching porridge, the mercy of shade, the trick of rinsing a bottle long enough to convince it to offer more. His love was logistics that never clocked out, a spreadsheet of sacrifices only he reviewed. He ironed identity into purpose and told himself endurance was a muscle that grew when fed with stubbornness. By measuring his breath, he measured his tomorrow. This arithmetic, simple and cruel, kept the lights blinking. Heat colored the hours until they tasted metallic. The road glittered like cheap jewelry, promising nothing and delivering dust. Chike read opportunity in the slow drift of trucks, in the posture of foremen at half-built houses, in the fatigue of shopkeepers who needed boxes moved. He offered back, shoulders first, voice second. Every acceptance felt like a reprieve, every refusal like a verdict passed by weather. He became fluent in the shrug of fate, in the narrow window where persistence becomes permission. The twins dozed to the percussion of traffic, 2 small anchors that held him to purpose. There were days the city blinked and seemed to remember him. A fruit seller slipped him an orange gone soft but sweet as apology. A welder let him shelter under a tin awning when rain finally argued better than the sky. The kindnesses were pennies in a jar that had a hole, yet each clink sounded like a chord resolving. He did not romanticize it, he banked it. He learned to keep his gratitude quiet and his eyes open, because mercy attracts scavengers. Somewhere beyond the overpass, something watched, rehearsing entrance. Even blessings sometimes prefer dramatic timing to punctuality. Fatigue filmed the edges of his sight, but discipline sharpened the center. He kept a mental ledger of favors owed to him and by him, and he evening counted like monks count beads. He refused distractions because many wore familiar faces. He declined shortcuts because most ended in pits. Rumor suggested a government program that evaporated when touched. Gossip suggested a stranger who sought a caretaker. Chike filed both under later and loaded another sack of gravel. The twins shifted against his chest, reminding him that later is a luxury rented by now. He paid up front, one breath at a time. He approached work like a negotiator, reading stance and silence before price. Some days, the wheelbarrow felt like a question he had the answer to. Other days, it felt like a sentence with no parole. Either way, he served it. The city, amused, tested him with sudden rains, small betrayals, and miscounts at dusk. He practiced the small math of not losing temper, because rage is expensive and rarely refunds. He calibrated hope to sturdy, not flashy, and kept pride deliberately threadbare. Even then, something stitched quietly in the background, a seam binding past and future like a plot discovering itself. It happened between a pothole and a promise. He had won a small contract moving sand to a site that believed walls could argue with weather. The sun performed its usual cruelty, and he performed his usual refusal to complain. Then the road stuttered, cars hiccuped, and a sleek shape joined the afternoon like a new sentence in a stubborn paragraph. Black paint drank the light. Tires whispered decisions. Windows hid expressions. The barrow grew lighter or heavier, he could not tell, which is the same dizziness that precedes luck and storms. Chike steadied his hands and kept moving, because motion favored him. One afternoon, as he pushed his barrow along a busy roadside, a sleek black SUV slowed beside him. The tinted window slid down to reveal a woman in her early 30s, Ngozi, radiant in an expensive dress, her eyes soft with pity. She stepped out, drawn not just by Chike's tired face but by the sight of two identical boys sleeping against their father's chest. "They're beautiful," she whispered. And in that moment, her heart was lost to them. She took them into her mansion, offering Chike a good job. The mansion announced itself by smell before sight, a suggestion of lilies and polish drifting over the compound wall. Days later, he would learn the precise geometry of the place, how light fell on marble like water and stayed, how silence turned echoes into residents. But first came the gate, its swing confident, its hinges smug, its welcome conditional and complete. The path from dust to stone felt like a translation that kept the original meaning but upgraded the vocabulary. He stepped where instructed and nowhere else. He let gratitude stand behind him, hands folded, observing rules he did not know. Work found him in new clothes. Not fabric, but tasks that wore better. He learned inventory that did not break skin, schedules that did not collapse at noon, and responsibility that felt like a bridge instead of a cliff. He touched the edges of luxury without claiming it, the way you test a river before wading. The twins discovered sheets that did not remember previous bodies, walls that held pictures instead of stains, and light that volunteered through generous windows. Chike translated wonder into checklists, so joy would not distract him from the labor that kept it solvent. Wonder, like hunger, multiplies. The house contained histories that walked at night. Floors creaked politely, portraits considered opinions, and the kitchen kept secrets that steamed. Chike arranged deliveries, learned the moods of generators, and negotiated weather with gutters that obeyed. He treated the place like a living creature, courting its cooperation. In private, he reheard the city, its engines still drumming behind the garden's well-behaved birds. He felt both near and far from the man whose elbows once argued with crowds. He locked that man in a room labeled Not Forgotten, and visited daily to remind himself who paid for this key. There were rooms where light seemed to think, considering angles as if composing an argument for hope. The twins practiced walking along a corridor that applauded with carpets. Chike calibrated his footsteps to sound like care rather than ownership. Choices multiplied like fruit trees after rain. He avoided the ones that ripened too fast. Instead, he watered reliability. He arrived 5 minutes early to everything and left 5 minutes late, leaving competence footprints that dried slowly. He kept his joy quiet because loud happiness attracts chores it cannot carry. Even so, happiness grew, rehearsing public life, waiting for a cue. Memory is an archivist with a mischievous filing system. One evening, steam curled from teacups like script, and a story returned wearing new shoes. He did not chase it. He let it approach. A road long ago, a fashion of danger, a stranger's resolve, a body lifted and carried like a verdict overturned. The picture developed in a darkroom behind his eyes, and a name he once did not have, he suddenly recognized. What the city forgets, the heart sometimes preserves in jars. The lid loosened on its own. Time shrugged. Coincidence tried to act casual. Fate pretended not to eavesdrop. Gratitude is a shy animal until you teach it to trust your hands. Days train it. Reliability fed it. What began as a transaction learned to breathe like a covenant. In the house, laughter made brief cameos, then lingered long enough to be cast. Chike kept boundaries as if they were fragile heirlooms, dusted weekly, never pawned. Yet lines sometimes learn dance, and what is straight can curve if the music changes. He did not push, but he did not flee. He kept moving, not toward an outcome, but away from ingratitude. The difference matters. The future noticed, and adjusted its steps. News of Ada drifted like a moth near a flame it could not understand. Somewhere, a cough rehearsed endings. Somewhere else, regret rehearsed apologies the air could not carry. Chike filed the rumor under distant weather and kept the barometer of his days steady. The twins learned their names as if tasting them. The mansion learned his diligence and returned favor with predictable problems instead of dramatic ones. He slept deeper, not entirely peacefully. Suspicion guards contentment because loss keeps a spare key. Even in rest, he held the world lightly, palms open, expecting it to move or be moved. Outside the compound, the city continued its test. Streets still preferred elbows to manners. Markets still tried to sell him old futures at new prices. He walked through them like a recovered injury, feeling phantom aches, honoring the pain that trained him without resenting the healing that replaced it. Sometimes he lifted his eyes and found the same sky he had known from his one-room past, except this version seemed less amused and more invested. High windows reflect more of you. They also show more of what approaches. He learned to trust reflections without worshipping them. At dusk, the house exhaled, and the day's noise filed itself. Chike counted victories in small piles, an appliance that did not surprise him, a bill that matched its promise, a schedule that kept mercy for naps. He charted the twins' growth against the calendar of debts retired and futures acquired. He kept a private museum of moments where despair had nearly won and let those memories charge an invisible battery. If storms returned, he would not plead, he would prepare. Preparation was a kind of prayer, and prayer, he'd learned, sometimes answers as logistics before it answers as light. He still visited the street where the wheelbarrow once tried to teach him humility by force. The new version of himself walked beside the old like brothers refusing rivalry. He acknowledged the scars as maps, not decorations. The city nodded back, a frenemy improved by boundaries. Rumors followed him like small dogs, curious about riches that were mostly routines. He kept pockets empty of arrogance and full of lists. Confidence wore quiet shoes. Somewhere, a hinge rehearsed. Somewhere, a shadow practiced kindness. Somewhere, the past circled his address, not malicious, perhaps merely curious. The door would hold. The heart would decide. He learned that safety is not the absence of threat but the presence of sturdiness. The house was sturdier now because he had learned its temper. He turned disaster drills into habits, and habits into culture. Staff rotated around his steadiness, grateful for things that failed predictably instead of suddenly. The twins grew into mischief accompanied by laughter that argued persuasively for forgiveness. He allowed himself rare luxuries, a second cup of tea, a slower walk down a corridor that admired him. Still, he kept contingency plans folded in his pocket. Plans are umbrellas you carry even when the sky smiles. At the edge of a late afternoon, he paused in the garden, where light marrowed the leaves and the breeze practiced good manners. The world felt briefly negotiable, as if it might grant a favor without presenting a bill. He considered the arithmetic of his blessings, the unsinkable buoyancy of two boys who believed floors were trampolines and days were elastic. He allowed himself to imagine a future that required less bracing and more welcoming. Somewhere, tires rehearsed an old story. Somewhere else, a cough shortened its sentences. Between them, he stood, a translator ready to convert chance into meaning. Morning arrived with the nervous quiet of a page about to turn. The mansion was awake but not yet noisy, its air holding the unspent energy of a day waiting for instruction. Chike moved through the corridors with his usual precision, adjusting curtains so light would enter respectfully. Outside, the garden rehearsed its colors. The twins chased the last dreams of the night. Then a shape appeared at the gate, thin as a closing sentence, wrapped in clothes that had forgotten their purpose. Ada. Her steps were hesitant, as though each was an apology too heavy to finish saying. She did not knock so much as lean into the gate, letting its iron bones support her own. Her face had been edited by illness, cheeks erased into hollows, lips punctuating each breath with effort. Chike saw her as one sees an object found in a river, recognizable yet altered by currents unseen. The air between them felt like it remembered arguments they had not yet had. The twins did not see her. They were elsewhere, their laughter insulating them from this arrival. Time, however, had no such mercy. It delivered her without ceremony, demanding he decide what to do with her. Pity arrived before anger could finish dressing itself. He saw not the woman who left but the body that was losing its tenancy. Her cough spoke in terms more final than any reconciliation. In his pocket, practicality began to write numbers, hospital bills, food, transport, but the pen kept breaking on the reality of her condition. He understood then that some investments are paid in dignity, not in outcomes. He took her inside, not into the rooms where his current life lived, but into the space reserved for emergencies that could not be turned away without wounding the mirror he faced each morning. Money moved faster than hope. He sent it toward prescriptions, toward consultations, toward anything that claimed to slow the clock. Receipts arrived more reliably than improvement. Ada's body seemed to have signed a separate agreement with fate, one that did not require her consent. Her cough began to own her sentences, interrupting them until words felt like guests overstaying. Chike kept the twins at a distance, unsure how to introduce them to a version of their mother that might leave before the meeting concluded. Nights became the longest corridors, each cough echoing like footsteps toward an unlit door. The morning she left again, she did not take a step. Her absence was announced by stillness, the kind that refuses to negotiate. Chike found her seated as if in thought, head inclined as though considering an answer, hands resting in a truce with the world. The air in the room had the politeness of a place that has just hosted departure. He closed her eyes, not because it was required, but because leaving them open would have suggested she was still waiting for something. Outside, the mansion continued its schedule, unaware it had just gained another silent story. Grief, the second time, did not knock. It used the key left under the mat by the first grief. It moved in, rearranged his thoughts, and sat at his table. But the twins still needed breakfast, uniforms, and the gentle tyranny of routine. He discovered that mourning could be done in the margins, between school drop-offs and staff briefings. He let the work of the estate become scaffolding for his composure. Every polished floor, every balanced account was a stitch holding him together. Grief tolerated this arrangement, content to haunt him in quieter hours when the twins' laughter had gone to bed. The twins, for their part, carried the day as if nothing fundamental had shifted. They still measured time by the arrival of snacks and the permission to play. They still trusted that the walls around them would hold. Chike took comfort in their ignorance, even as he knew it was temporary. Childhood is a lease. Sooner or later, reality demands rent. He resolved to pay as much of it in advance as he could, insulating them with education, opportunity, and the kind of steadiness that could outlast questions they were not yet ready to ask. Life in the mansion expanded to absorb the loss. Rooms that had felt merely large now seemed purposeful, their quietness a place to store healing. Chike worked as if loyalty could be repaid in punctuality, overseeing repairs, managing staff with the same evenness he had once used to balance his wheelbarrow. Ngozi watched from the edges, offering neither intrusion nor indifference. Between them grew a rhythm of shared glances and unspoken acknowledgments, the kind of communication that occurs when two people have both rescued and been rescued by each other. Time added layers, and layers, when tended, begin to resemble permanence. The wedding came as the natural answer to a question neither had asked aloud. It was less a spectacle than a ceremony of mutual recognition, a public filing of what the private heart already knew. Guests spoke of destiny and timing. Chike thought of work and trust. The twins, in tailored suits, carried rings they could not yet understand the weight of. The vows were spoken in tones that respected the seriousness of what they promised. In the photographs, Chike looked like a man who had learned that love, like shelter, was best built to endure storms rather than to impress visitors. Storms, inevitably, came. They rarely introduced themselves politely. The first was a visitor from his past, a cousin who arrived with the loose urgency of someone who had already decided how generous family should be. He spoke in the currency of shared blood but counted repayment in unkept promises. Chike, remembering the poverty that had once made such requests impossible to refuse, measured his answer carefully. He offered what would not unbalance his current life, and refused what would. The cousin left with a mixture of gratitude and grievance, leaving behind the faint smell of opportunism that lingers longer than intended. The second storm was structural, quite literally. A section of the estate wall, weakened by months of quiet neglect, chose a night of heavy rain to collapse. The sound was less dramatic than the implications: security compromised, expense inevitable, whispers among the staff. Chike handled it with the same economy of motion he had once used to steer a loaded wheelbarrow through chaos. Assess, act, adjust. Contractors were summoned, materials ordered, timelines enforced. The wall rose again, this time stronger, the repair not just physical but symbolic. A house, like a life, earns its safety by how quickly it mends what is broken. Through it all, Chike carried himself as one who understood that fortune was rented, never owned. He did not mistake the mansion for invulnerability. He kept his routines disciplined, his generosity measured, his pride invisible to those who might test it. The twins grew, absorbing the quiet lessons of resilience more deeply than the formal ones taught in their classrooms. Ngoza's trust deepened into reliance, and reliance, when handled without entitlement, becomes a form of love. Chike knew better than to believe the journey was over. He had learned early that the world likes to test the load-bearing capacity of its carriers. There were evenings when the house, heavy with the day's silence, seemed to ask him if he was ready to stop carrying. He would stand in the garden, watching the twins invent games from air and shadow, and feel the weight redistribute itself. It was no longer just the survival of a family he bore, but the maintenance of a life built from that survival. He understood now that the world does not become lighter, you simply become stronger. And as long as he could keep walking, there was no reason to put it down. In the quiet moments before sleep, Chike would sometimes replay the years: the wheelbarrow, the roadside, the black SUV, the first time he stepped into the mansion. The images did not fade, they sharpened, as if reminding him that every gain was an echo of an earlier loss. He accepted this as balance, not punishment. The man who once carried 2 sleeping boys through a city that barely noticed now carried a life that many might envy but few could endure. He did not ask for ease. He asked only for the strength to keep carrying, whatever the world decided to place in his arms.